All right, should we start? Looks like everyone's kind of in. Thanks everyone for coming. Today we're going to talk about risk management. So I put as the subtitle, Aeronautical Decision Making in Theory and in Practice. So we'll talk a little bit about risk management, a little bit of aeronautical decision making, and then the first half of the presentation is sort of the theoretical groundwork so that you have a bit of a basis for what these topics mean. And then the second half of the presentation is all about, okay, what's the case studies, that ways of thinking about it in practice. A little bit about me to start. So some of you know me already. So my name's Jack O'Leary, or legally John, which sometimes confuses people, but everyone calls me Jack. Minnesotan by birth, Californian by choice. I'm a double-I airplane single-engine land, senior CFI with West Valley, as well as an airplane owner on the line for 81034. If you fly Archers, you might know it. At the end, I'll have time for questions. So if you have any questions about any of those things, I'm happy to talk mostly about risk management, but anything's fair game. Formerly worked at Apple in SPG. If that means something to you, then you'll know a little bit of the history of that team. If not, you can Google it later, and it has some interesting backstory. But unreleased products is a different way of saying it. I was a software engineer there to start, then an engineering manager, and finally a program manager towards the end. I was also a Microsoft Flight Sim fly-in host for a while. So if you want to see some old, ridiculous YouTube videos, Jules Altus was my username. So used to host a Twitch stream and a couple other things. Very much a COVID pandemic activity, but it was quite fun. And then father of one baby and one dog. Okay, a couple of housekeeping things. First, thank you to West Valley for hosting, Emily and Ashley in particular for getting everything together. This is the first safety seminar we've done in a while, so there might be a little bit of rough edges as we're kind of figuring things out, so bear with us, but so far everything seems good. Second bit of housekeeping, so this is a very different presentation than you may be used to. At Apple, I was really big on document-based meetings, and the idea of a document-based meeting is that the goal of a meeting is for you to learn something from whatever's going on or to come to some decision. The best way to do that is usually to hand someone a document with all the information so they can just digest it however they digest best. You can jump around, you can look at different parts of it. I tried to do that same sort of thing in this presentation, and what that looks like is most of the slides are actually just a small bullet point and then a QR code to a web page. I'll pull up the web page and talk through it, so if you learn best by listening to someone speak or you like to see on the big screen, that totally works. But also if you learn best by reading yourself or you want to be able to jump around, you're welcome to scan the QR code. I won't be offended if you're on your phone. It's kind of the idea, is that you're digesting it however you learn best. So that's document-based meetings. The other piece, just to know, there's this thing I'll be using called the CFI Commonplace book. So I've been working on an open source syllabus online. Actually, Peter's also contributing a part to it, and a couple other CFIs as well. This is a resource for pilots, for CFIs, just kind of a place to put things that are useful to know for people in aviation. So you'll see it as it comes on there, but if you look at it and go, that's really cool, I want to pull stuff from it, you're welcome to, or you want to contribute back to it, that's also fine. It's called the CFI Commonplace book. Also, if you forget to scan the QR code when it comes up, if you search CFI Commonplace book, will take you to where you're going. All right, the last bit of housekeeping is terminology. So we're going to talk about ADM and risk management both today. I wanted to touch on the terminology because while I was preparing for this presentation, one of the most difficult pieces to chew on was just what the right word was to describe what I was trying to talk about. So first of all, SRM. Who knows what SRM is?
Single Pilot Resource Management.
Single Pilot Resource Management. Excellent. Good. What about ADM? Aeronautical Decision Making. Good. And then risk management, of course, has its own words up there. All right. Nice. Yeah. So SRM is all of the processes that we use as single pilots to make sure that we're staying safe while flying. So this would include things like ADM and risk management, but also additional things like how do you organize the flight deck, or what are your resources externally like ATC or flight service, things like that. This is the biggest of the umbrellas, at least how I'm thinking about it. ADM then is the decision-making process that we use. It happens before you fly, it happens during flight, it happens all the time. It's this continuous cycle, and we'll spend most of the time, about a quarter of the presentation is about ADM itself. The way that I think about it, so let me put this up. So this is ADM, 3P, you may recognize. The way that I'm going to talk about risk management is as these two parts of the 3Ps, so perceive and process. I wanted to call this out specifically because when I get into some of the resources, if you read through the advisory circulars and some of the other pieces on risk management, different resources present the top level idea. How do I want to say this? It is very unclear which umbrella contains which things, which bucket contains which other things. So some textbooks say risk management at the top, and then they talk about ADM. Or sometimes they say single pilot research management, and they talk about risk management, and then go on to other things. So the way that I'm thinking about it is biggest umbrella is SRM, little smaller umbrella is ADM, and then the smallest umbrella is risk management. A little bit of an informed opinion choice. If you read some other stuff, you might get a different conclusion on it, but I think this is a fair way to present it at least. Okay, cool. Looks like everyone's got it. The big takeaway from this presentation, you may have heard this quote from Frank Borman: a superior pilot uses his superior judgment to avoid situations which require the use of his superior skill. So the hope coming out of this presentation is that you have a couple of new tools to help have a better judgment, to make better decisions while flying, so that you avoid those situations where you might actually need to do something more dramatic to make the flight safe. Okay, I kind of talked about this a little bit, so we'll do the theory first and the application, so dive into the theory. So the first piece on here is risk management. Like I said, there's a QR code. If you're someone who prefers to read along, you're welcome to scan it. You could also search it later, and you'll be able to find it. Risk management is the part of the decision-making process which relies on situational awareness, problem recognition, and good judgment to reduce risks associated with each flight. So again, this is the perceive and process part of the 3 Ps. And I am now going to attempt to switch to my risk management notes. Cool. Okay, so this is the CFI Commonplace book. I'm going to do it from, oops. Oh, interesting. Doesn't match my screen anymore. Oh, there it is. It's just behind. All right, whatever. It's got a little bit of a lag, but that should be okay. I like to use the Obsidian software, which, by the way, another takeaway from this is if you like this software and you're like, I want to use that for my notes, it's called Obsidian. It's really great, honestly. It's a way of doing kind of connecting ideas. So, okay, key takeaways from risk management. 80% of aviation accidents are caused by pilot error. This is a statistic from the NTSB over like 20 years of data. It's also a little bit hard to say what counts as pilot error because if a pilot flies into the side of a mountain, the cause of the accident was the flying into the mountain, but almost always it's the series of judgments beforehand that lead to it. So this is from the Risk Management Handbook from the NTSB, but that's one kind of baseline statistic. When a pilot follows good decision-making practices, risks in flight can be reduced or even eliminated. And PAVE and FRAT are 2 really good tools and acronyms to identify potential hazards and risk mitigation. So we'll talk more in depth about those in a moment. You already know this, but flight has some inherent level of risk, and so the goal of risk management is to proactively identify safety-related hazards and then find ways to mitigate the associated risks. So we just talked about hazards and risks on here. Oh, it's not showing up. Cool.
There's been some lag. It just shows up magically.
Like catches up all of a sudden? Okay, let me see if I can do this. Potentially I could plug into the HDMI, which is less fun, but more dependable, I would guess. Yeah. All right, we'll see if it kicks out again, then we'll try a different one. Okay, so has proactively identify safety-related hazards and also their risks. So first thing then is what are hazards? What are risks? So hazard is a condition that could cause an accident, where a risk is the combination of the severity and the likelihood of an adverse outcome that might result from a hazard. So an example from the Risk Management Handbook I really liked is someone dealing with traffic in a street. So the traffic itself is always a hazard, but it's not a risk until someone goes to try and cross the street. So the hazard is the condition that could cause an accident, but then the risk is this: what's the severity and likelihood of a negative outcome based on actually going and flying. Another one that comes up a lot is like, let's say you have a nick in the propeller. The nick is a hazard just because it exists, but it's not a risk until you decide to go fly. The other piece about risk that's tricky is risk assessment depends on the pilot's experience, their health, their education. So something that I might find too risky, another pilot may be okay with, and both of those judgments could be correct. It's not always a single correct answer to these. Even in the case studies we look at today, you might look at it and go, I feel differently about that. And that might be correct. It just depends on experience. It depends on the situation. Okay, pre-flight. That's still working. So I'm going to break these into two different types of risk management. In pre-flight, we're sitting on the ground. We have all the time in the world to think through things. And so the frameworks we use are a little bit more verbose. The in-flight side of things, of course, we're actually flying a plane through space, so we don't have as much time to react. And so it's a little bit different way of processing it. First, identifying hazards. So PAVE is a great way to identify hazards. Who knows what the acronym PAVE stands for? Someone give me the P. Pilot. Okay, excellent. The A, go for it, yeah.
Aircraft environment.
Okay.
E.
External pressures.
External pressures.
Like a room full of people staring at you, yeah. So yeah, exactly. Pilot, aircraft, environment, external pressures. This is sort of a way of thinking about the sources that you might have for hazards. It's just making sure you're not missing any of the big picture stuff. You also may have hazardous attitudes. You as a pilot or whoever's flying the plane may have hazardous attitudes. And these hazardous attitudes can lead to dangerous decisions while flying. We'll touch a little bit on hazardous attitudes here because it's an important topic. There's enough here that you could do an entire presentation just on it, but 5 hazardous attitudes. Oop. Okay, great, it didn't load, so who can give me one of the hazardous attitudes?
Macho?
Macho, nice, excellent. Another one?
It couldn't happen to me or something.
Yeah, couldn't happen to me. Invulnerability, good. What did you say?
Anti-authority.
Anti-authority, the classic, yep.
It's a resignation.
Resignation, good. The last one is impulsivity. So if you saw me moments ago reaching to just grab and plug the HDMI in, that was a good example of impulsivity. Although now oh no, it's already loaded, okay. I'm gonna see if there's a plug here. Emily, do you know if we have a adapter for USB-C?
Let me go ask.
Okay. I might have one in my bag too, actually. No, that's right. Okay, 5 hazardous attitudes. So, and someone already mentioned some of the antidotes and the meanings. Knowing the different meanings, knowing the antidotes, is very useful depending on the hazardous attitudes that you yourself might have. So, different people have different ways that they respond to situations. If you find yourself in a situation, ATC gives you an instruction, you go, that's dumb. Being able to recognize that that's an anti-authority attitude is the first step to then saying, okay, the antidote to this is follow the rules, they're usually right. In that case, once you get on the ground, if you have a problem, you can call the tower and talk to them. But at the moment, follow the rules, they're usually right. One resource, just to kind of finish out this topic, is this hazardous attitude inventory test. Has anyone seen this before? So you've read through this? Yeah. It's pretty cool, right? So
Pretty old too.
it's pretty old, yeah. Yeah. It's pretty old.
Timeless.
Timeless is a good word for it. So this is an example of one of the scenarios inside Advisory Circular 60-22. It walks through, gives you a scenario up top like in this one, and then it gives you 5 different reasons and asks you to rank from 1 to 5 the least to most likely reason that you would make this decision, which is a very interesting way to do it because it forces you to say which one would you more likely do, not saying that you would do any of them. And then you go through all of it, you tally up your numbers, and you kind of see where your hazardous attitudes most likely lie. I would recommend to everyone, if you're curious going through it, it's like maybe 10 questions or something, but it's really good. Presents some pretty difficult scenarios sometimes. For instance, this is one we all could probably imagine seeing, which is you're running a little bit late, and because you're running behind, what do you do? And so in this case, they say you decided to skip the pre-flight check, and why would you do that? And it talks to you those things. All right, we'll keep going from this. There's a ton more information on this page too. Okay, so that's identifying hazards. We use PAVE to do that for the most part. Next, we assess the level of risk. So once we've identified the hazards, we have to look at their associated risks to determine the severity and likelihood. And this is where a FRAT can be really useful. So who's used a FRAT before, by the way? Oh, yeah?
No, I've never used it.
Okay.
I've lived in one.
Okay, it's pretty close. It's like the same thing, basically. It's all risk stuff, right? So FRAT can be helpful for the process. We'll walk through actually a case study on this, so we're going to do a more detailed breakdown of how you might approach this. That's the second half of the presentation. But for each...
What does FRAT stand for?
Oh, I'm sorry, thank you. FRAT is a flight risk assessment tool. And you might recognize it from this picture if you've seen this in the textbooks. This is the same conversation of things. So flight risk assessment tool. What you do is for each risk, you write the associated likelihood and severity, and then use a risk assessment matrix, which is that one we just looked at, to determine the level of risk. For any risk greater than medium, or if your company or personal minimums are different, that's also fine. But anything greater than a medium by the FAA standards, you should find a mitigation. I left this a little bit nebulous because we're going to go through a whole case study in just a minute, but that's the high-level thing, is identify the severity and likelihood of any given risk, and then mitigate those that are greater than medium risk. Okay, and the last one for pre-flight risk management is personal minimums. Hopefully everyone here has heard of personal minimums. Personal minimums are another topic that could be an entire presentation on their own. I have a page up on here if you're curious to read more. At one point I went through and really put a lot of thought into how to present this. So it's pretty good as a starting point if you haven't thought much about personal minimums. At the end, it also has a lot of resources for other frameworks for processing risk and thinking about it relative to your experience. So this is a pretty good starting point. Everyone's familiar with personal minimums? Generally, it looks like people are all, okay, cool, sounds good. We won't spend much more time on it then today, but at the end of the day, it's you making the risk assessment, and so having your own personal minimums based on your experience is a really helpful way of making sure that you're staying safe and making good decisions. Managing risk requires a conscious effort in establishing standards. Pilots who practice effective risk minimums have predetermined personal minimums and have formed habit patterns and checklists to incorporate them. This is one of those things that's a little tricky with personal minimums. I'm sure every CFI in the room has had a student who it's gusting to 20, and you say, well, what are your personal minimums? And they say 15, and then you say, so are you going to fly? And they go, yeah. It's like, okay. And the problem is often that although you have the personal minimum, you're not actually incorporating it into the flow. You're not thinking about it before you go and fly, which is, of course, a problem. One of the big ones for me is I always make sure students can do crosswind calculations in their head, because you usually have a crosswind maximum you're willing to do, but I'm always surprised at the number of pilots I fly with who get an ATIS and then not know how to convert that into a crosswind component. Well, then you don't know if you're flying beyond your crosswind limits because you're not really thinking about it. It's a good example of when you get your ATIS, make sure you've incorporated that personal minimum. Professional pilots live by the numbers, and so should general aviation pilots. All right, on to in-flight. For in-flight, there's this idea of threats and errors. Oops. Oh, yeah, good. Perfect. So a threat is a hazard in the environment that's outside the crew's control. So you have a system failure, that's a threat. You get unexpected ACC instructions, those are threats. An error, on the other hand, is a deviation from intended or expected actions. So if you have something come up, like you're given taxi instructions and you don't follow them, that would be an example of an error. So an unexpected taxi clearance is an example of a threat. ATC tells you to taxi down uniform. They usually tell you to go down tango, and you say, I don't know what to do now. That's your threat. An example of an error would be like a runway incursion that you've now deviated from what was expected, and a runway incursion would be a dramatic example, but you've reduced the safety margins because of it. As pilots, we protect against threats and errors in a couple of ways. So this list will look probably pretty familiar, maybe all put together. Checklists, SOPs, best practices. Utilizing a second person is a great resource. Even if someone in the plane next to you is not a pilot, just telling them to look for traffic and keep an eye out for things that they can do. It's good. Clear communication, like doing the safety brief with your passengers, make sure that they know what to expect if something comes up. Effective situational awareness, and keeping up with the next two things. Anyone a fan of Rod Machado? Ooh, okay. I love Rod Machado, so I'll be a little bit of an evangelist on it. So Rod Machado has very, very corny humor and very good YouTube videos, in my opinion. One of the things that he talks a lot about is the next two things, which is the question, what's the two most important things in aviation? Two most important things in aviation are the next two things. And it's about staying ahead of the airplane by always thinking, okay, what's going to happen next? And then what's immediately after that? Especially with flying IFR, this is a big thing that I keep in the back of my head is, okay, I'm approaching some fix. What am I going to do when I reach it? Then what's the next thing? Make sure you're staying ahead of the airplane. There's a link to this video on here. So if you're curious afterwards, you want to watch some of Rod Machado stuff. It's my style of humor, which is not everyone's style of humor, but I think it's funny. Also on this list for defending against threats and errors, automation management, and then effective crew resource management and SRM. Here's an example of when we were talking about terminology before, and I said they sort of have buckets that'll have the bigger bucket is inside the smaller bucket. So in the discussion about threats and errors, CRM and SRM are also giant topics. We won't get into them today, but generally is how we prevent against them. Altogether, these then build a Swiss cheese model for dealing with threats and errors. So the idea is that any given SOP, any given checklist, any given flow that you're doing won't capture everything, but by doing several of them together, then all the layers in totality will prevent at least a threat from developing into an incident or accident. So either your checklist will catch it, or maybe your effective SA will catch it, or something else. One of the layers in the Swiss cheese model will prevent the accident from happening. Have people heard of the Swiss cheese model before? Yeah, okay. This one seems to be pretty common. So I talked a lot about this in my Apple project. But anyway. Okay, some pilots employed the 3 strikes and you're out rule. Anyone use the 3 strikes and you're out? Okay, a couple of people, some of the people I fly with do. That's funny, yep.
You give us an example.
Yeah, 3 strikes and you're out. Yep. So 3 strikes and you're out is a way of avoiding building an accident chain. A good example of this is, let's say you go out to the plane and you forgot to charge your iPad. So now you don't have your iPad. You normally fly with your iPad. That in and of itself, maybe not that big a deal. And then you get to the run-up area and the autopilot's not working correctly. Well, you go through an op equipment and it's not required, but now you got 2 things. There's 2 strikes against this flight. And then you go and the crosswind component is at your limits. If any one of those things had happened, maybe you'd say, I feel okay about this, depending on the situation. But now you've got a series of things that are leading to an accident. And so 3 strikes and you're out means good time to cancel the flight there, avoid building this accident chain, and just come back another day for the flight. The comparable one is sometimes people say, what would the start of the NTSB report sound like? So if you're thinking through and it sounds like you're writing the beginning of an NTSB write-up, it's probably a bad sign to do the flight. So both of these things are about avoiding the accident chain. Single decision may not lead to the accident, but it's the result of the series of decisions together that then provides the negative outcome. Okay. Automation, yet another topic that is a whole big can of worms. I'll pull this up briefly just to highlight a couple of things, but for risk management, the use and misuse of automation is a big deal. If you're using it correctly, it can be a huge help. If you're using it incorrectly, it can be its own source of risk and potential problems. This page has a bunch of information. This is what I use to teach about autopilot, so I won't go through the whole thing. But 2 really useful links on here. Yeah, Children of the Magenta, you knew it was coming. Yeah.
I watched that one, that's great.
Yeah, Children of the Magenta Line is a wonderful video. It talks about an over-reliance on automation and how we push back against that, sort of if the autopilot does something unexpected, how should you respond to it, things like that. Really, really good video. Couldn't recommend it enough. Also on here is the American 965 crash. So this is the one, they were coming into Columbia and they entered the wrong waypoint and the plane started turning off to the left and crashed into a mountain. It's about making sure that when you plug something into the autopilot, verifying that what you plugged in is what you're actually getting, and then monitoring it over time to make sure that it's still flying how it's supposed to be flying. Both really good reads. We won't go into them more today, but good to be aware of. Okay, so automation. And last but not least, so we're still in the in-flight part of risk management. Again, we have a little bit of a which umbrella is under which umbrella problem, but aeronautical decision-making. So risk management is part of aeronautical decision-making. It can be thought of as the perceive and process steps. We talked about that already. And for more information, we'll go into ADM. Additional resources on here. Risk Management Handbook's great. PHAC Chapter 2 is great. And Advisory Circular 60-22 is also great. These are all 3 really good reads. The last link on here, Risky Business. I read through just a ton of material from the FAA, from different AOPA and organizations prepping for this. And by far the best write-up was this Risky Business one. So if you want to go back and hit on some of the key ideas, I think this author struck the right balance between kind of connecting the history to the changes to the ACS resulting from this. She talks about the different models without going into too much detail. It's really, really good write-up. All right, there's risk management. I'm going to pop back to here for about 2 seconds, pull up ADM. So aeronautical decision-making is a systematic approach to the mental processes used by aircraft pilots to consistently determine the best course of action in response to a given set of circumstances. Again, QR code there. And I'm going to hop into here, talk about ADM. Okay, are we still syncing? We are not. It doesn't like when I change applications. Oh, Emily, what was the verdict on that?
Oh, don't have it.
Okay, that's fine. Yeah. No worries. Oops. All right. EDM. Key takeaways. So this is the ongoing process. We already talked about the definition of this. The 3P model is the big one I'd like you to take away from this section. So from the risk management section, FRAT is the big model, and we'll do a case study on that in a second. From this one, it's 3P. Some situations require automatic decision-making based on your training and experience. So we'll talk about the situations like you have a bounced landing, you don't have time to run through a full model, and how do we think about that? So we'll touch on that a bit too. ADM is a systematic approach to risk assessment and stress management. Stress management is another really big topic for aeronautical decision-making. I don't go into it much in here, but this is another one. If you're someone who deals with a lot of stress in work or in life, it's worth reading up on because there's very useful advice in a lot of these publications. Talking about how your personal attitudes influence decision-making, and importantly, this idea that decisions and the decision-making process is something that you can actually improve on. So historically, when pilots were taught about aeronautical decision-making, it was sort of, you fly enough, and if you continue to not die while you fly, then you'll eventually be pretty good at decision-making. And the hope was just that your bucket of luck will run out at the same time your bucket of experience fills up or whatever. That's a really bad version of that quote. But and later on, the FAA started to realize, hey, if we actually taught people how to make better decisions, hopefully they will then go on to have less risky flights. And sure enough, they saw a reduction in accidents and incidents. So it seems to be working. 3 models for a structured framework here are 5P, 3P, which includes PAVE, CARE, and TEAM, and the DECIDE models. This is like a horrendous alphabet soup, and one of the funnier parts prepping for this was going on Reddit to read people's opinions on some of these concepts, and it's just, everyone hates how many letters there are here. So don't worry about it too much. We'll talk about these so you have some familiarity with what they are, but really, 3P is the one I want you to take away from it. Who all has heard of 5P, 3P, CARE, TEAM, DECIDE? Are these... You've heard? Okay, nice. Some of them, yeah, a couple of them, yep. Yeah, I remember studying them for my CFI, and that was the only time, at that point I had it memorized, but until prepping for this, no, but it's okay.
5P is good.
5P is good. So yeah, 5P well anyway, we'll talk about it right now. So 5P is used to evaluate the situation. Do you remember what they stand for by chance?
The plane.
Plane, good.
The
Programming.
The
Passengers.
Pilot.
Pilot.
And the plan.
Plan, very good, yes.
It takes 2 minutes to run through when you're on a long cross country, nothing to do.
Yep, yeah, exactly. It's a nice thing to do, and exactly.
It is something to do, it's useful.
Yeah, so these are the 5 Ps. The idea with it, like Mick was saying, is if you run through the 5 Ps at critical phases of the flight, you'll catch certain kinds of issues that you otherwise might not notice. So a good example of this is before takeoff, you run through the 5 Ps and you notice your plane is not configured properly for the type of takeoff you need or something like that. Maybe you're en route, you run through, you get to the passenger step, you go, oh, I should check to see if anyone needs the bathroom while we're over this airport, and you can ask your passengers for it. It's related to PAVE in a lot of ways. I think when people talk about the 5 Ps, they usually just use PAVE instead, and honestly, I think that's a fair way to do it. Certainly there's enough overlap with it, but it does miss passengers and programming, which does come up in cross countries. I mean, you have to deal with these things in situations. So that's
programming.
Programming is like programming the autopilot.
That's it.
Yeah, like make sure your GPS is set up and your FMS and stuff. Yeah, more like, I think of it especially as you're coming in for like an instrument approach, although it's technically everything en route. Okay, so that's the 5 Ps. That's for evaluating the situation. Time critical decisions. Most decisions a pilot makes are time sensitive while we're out flying. Depending on the circumstances, you may have a little bit more time and you can use an analytical decision-making framework. Or if you need to respond more instantaneously, you might need to use an automatic decision-making framework. I put these 2 in here because I thought they sort of explained it well, but just to walk through it super quickly, and then we'll dive a bit more in detail. The analytical one starts off with some situation, breaks it into PAVE. You then detect the problem and evaluate the event. Notice these are almost the exact same between the 2 models. In the analytical version, you start to think about the capabilities of the pilot, outside factors, the risks and hazards, figure out the outcome you want, brainstorm some solutions, decide the best course of action, take the action and see what the effect was, and then either you're back up to decision or you're done. That can be one way it goes. Come on in, Orhan. On the automatic side, it's similar at the beginning. You're essentially detecting some sort of issue, but then it falls back to the risk to the flight, pilot training, and experience. You take an action based on your experience, and hopefully it works, and if not, you continue to take actions. We'll talk about some of the pros and cons with these, but if you don't have time to do a full analytical decision-making process, then automatic may be your only option. So analytical. All right, now we're into 3P or decide. Like I said, 3P is the one I want you to really walk away with. Decide is nice, but it's kind of, well, you'll see why. So often simpler and favored in practice, you perceive the given set of circumstances, process by evaluating their potential impact on flight safety, and then perform by implementing the best course of action. The FAA has a bunch of acronyms it likes, and I'll go through them briefly, but we'll do it in the case study more. So we perceive with PAVE, we already talked about that, process with care, and then perform with team. In the case study, we'll walk through what each of these means a little more, but one rule of thumb that I really liked from, I can't remember which publication, was if you're going through the process step, you're thinking about the consequences of an action, and you find yourself saying it's probably going to be okay, it's time for a reality check. Because as soon as you're saying it's probably fine, that might be a lot of risk you're taking on without thinking it through. Like I said, we'll go into the case study in just a second. Decide has a lot of overlap. So decide is detect, estimate, choose, identify, do, and evaluate. The 3 Ps sort of map onto decide, and in both cases, it's a cyclical process. So at the end of decide, after you've detected, you evaluate the effect of the action, countering the change, and then come back up to the top and start to redetect for issues. Okay, so there's 3P and decide. Last piece for our kind of theoretical framework stuff is automatic or naturalistic decision-making. You'll hear it called both. When time's not available, experts may fall back on past experiences. This allows them to clarify options quickly and select a workable option. Naturalistic or automatic decision-making improves with training and experience. This is the reason when you go out and practice simulated engine failures, we drill those until it's automatic. Because at the moment it happens, you don't have time to go through and think about what you're going to do next. You need to just respond. Similarly, things like knowing when to do a go-around. Sometimes you need to initiate the go-around, just initiate it. You can't go through the 3P sort of process. The problem with automatic decision-making is it's more susceptible to issues like confirmation bias or operational pitfalls. So this is things like duck under syndrome or get their itis or those sorts of things. Because you're just relying on your past experience, if your past experience was, well, it worked last time, you could be taking on a risk that's actually very unsafe just because you got lucky the last time you did it. Shoot, yeah.
What is duck under syndrome?
Duck under syndrome is for IFR. So this is essentially if you're coming into on an instrument approach and you reach your decision altitude or your MDA, you're supposed to then initiate your go-around. The duck under syndrome is wanting to go a little further because it's probably going to break out, and this is how people then
The
crash.
whole thing that just happened in San Diego.
Oh, is that what it was?
The citation? Yeah.
There
Went
you
into
go.
like 5 homes.
Wow, okay. There you go. I didn't know that was the cause, but yeah.
Plus it was at 3 a.m., I
Yeah. But
That's probably other things going on too then, yeah. Good question, yeah, it's duck under syndrome. There's a lot of other operational pitfalls that are good to know about, also in AC 60-22, so if you want to read through it. Okay, ADM, a lot of the same resources here. The only other one I'll call out slightly different. If you're looking for wings credit, I can't unfortunately offer you wings credit, but there is a Art of Aeronautical Decision Making from FAA Safety. A lot of overlap with what we talked about today, and pretty good little course, so you can go and do that, and then there's wings credit at the end of it. All right, quick time check. We're doing okay. I want to make sure I save some time for questions, so let me pop over to here. We talked about the theory part. Now we're going to go to application. We'll do a little bit of in-practice stuff. First one I want to talk about is the Flight Risk Assessment Tool, the FRAT. So it's a way to record and analyze identified hazards and risks. It can be either numerical or narrative. So I'm going to demonstrate a more numerical one. Actually, it's more of a narrative one that I'm doing. But numerical would be if you have like a certain number of risk points, sort of, and as you get like it's a night flight and you're tired, this adds accumulations of risk. There's a couple of really good links actually I'll share on here. But okay, and we switched again, and we don't like when we switch. Give me 1 second. Mm-hmm. Okay. One other thing. I had a presentation once with a Apple executive, and we were supposed to use an Apple product to do it, and it failed during the presentation. And it was very difficult as the person running the meeting, because on the one hand, I was so glad that any heat coming out of this meeting was going to be directed at the other team, because it didn't matter what I was saying was good or bad, because someone else was getting in a lot of trouble. But on the other hand, I was sitting there going, I really do need this to work. Yeah. Okay. See if I have any other ideas here. Oh, there we go. It's continuing to want to. Let me try it this way.
I still think the Wi-Fi is a little bit wonky.
Oh yeah, yeah. You know, I should have brought a little connector thing. Ironically, I did bring one, but it doesn't have a HDMI on it. That's okay. So Emily, this will be a good one for next time we do a presentation. Yeah, it's okay. It's interesting, it shows me as connected actually, but it's not.
I could have given you away. I could do the obstacle course.
Okay, one other idea. Otherwise, I can do it on the whiteboard, good old-fashioned way. There's not the write-up is pretty light. Okay, cool. We're in good shape here, so it would not be too hard to do. All right, risk assessment. So we're talking about FRAT and how we do risk assessment. So I had a student ask to do a solo flight while there were showers in the vicinity, and this was an interesting question because I hadn't really thought through how risk would work for a student flying solo with showers. And so this was a great time to use a FRAT so I could process through more completely on if I thought this was okay or not. We talked about what the FRAT is already a little bit. So this risk assessment breaks it into the likelihood or the severity of an outcome. So likelihood is somewhere between probable, occasional, remote, or improbable. And the severity then is catastrophic, critical, marginal, or negligible. Based on the cross-match of the two, you get some composite risk. So if a issue is remote but serious, but catastrophic, then you have a serious risk associated with it. Different combinations give you different levels of risk. So when looking at risk assessment for a student flying solo in the vicinity of the airport, the first question is, what is the risk? So the risk in this case is loss of control at a low altitude. Student's not instrument rated. They're a new pilot, almost by definition, but they're not a rated pilot besides student pilot. And a sudden drop in visibility could result in an unrecoverable attitude at the traffic pattern level. So that's the risk. The likelihood, I would argue, is remote. I think you could argue it's improbable that they're going to lose control there, but also there are showers in the vicinity, so a drop in visibility is plausible. And also they're a new pilot. I mean, they don't have much experience flying under the hood besides maybe the training we've done. And they're definitely not instrument rated. And so it felt like improbable was too low, remote felt better. And the severity is catastrophic. I mean, loss of control at a low altitude almost certainly results in crashing the airplane, significant damage, serious injury, or even loss of life. And so if we look at the intersection of these two, a remote likelihood and a catastrophic severity is a serious risk. And so the FRAT then looks like this. So risk is loss of control, remote, and serious risk. And because it's a serious risk, we need to do something to mitigate it. In this case, the student opted to just not fly, which was fine. Another one is maybe you take a CFI along so that you can see what it's like to be in those conditions. Then you've reduced the chance of loss of control. Just another example, I put wet runway on there, so risk of an overrun. In this case, I thought the severity was critical. More likely that you'd have serious damage, but or you might have serious damage, but it's not necessary loss of life or fatalities. And so the composite risk there is medium. Medium risk is allowable. It's sort of you deciding if you're going to take on the risk or not. I won't go into it much more today, but I also put some thought into student versus CFI risk tolerance. So something other CFIs learners probably run into is you think it's too risky, but the student thinks it's fine. And sometimes it's clearly they just don't know enough yet, and that's one problem. But sometimes it's like another pilot would feel comfortable with this, but I don't feel comfortable with this. How should I think about the risk? Because it's sort of this CFI is taking on the risk and the student's taking on the risk. So I did a frat for those as well. You can kind of check through it if you'd like. Does it make sense a little more how to use a frat to do this sort of risk assessment? Okay, cool. I use this, especially when I teach mountain flying, as a big part of the tool. So, you show up and it's a high density altitude day and you have maybe a little less than the margins you like on the runway. What are you going to do? And we start with a frat and walk through these different things, assess the level of risk, and then decide mitigations. The other thing I wanted to talk a little bit about with this, and I ended up just putting, I didn't switch back. That's probably fine. Teaching risk assessment in pre-flight. So I've started integrating discussions about severity and likelihood from early lessons when first teaching how to pre-flight. Inevitably, you'll have a student ask something like, there's a crack in the wingtip plastic. Is this a problem? And initially when I was teaching, the answer was just like, oh, don't worry about that. Like, essentially, I know that it's not a problem. I can tell you it's not a problem. That's fine. I found it more useful, though, to walk them through severity and likelihood whenever they encounter these kinds of things so they can start to have the mental framework on that risk assessment. So a cracked wingtip, well, if it's drill stopped, maybe the risk that we're worried about is it spreads all the way around, the wingtip falls off. Maybe it seems improbable, so that's our likelihood is improbable, but probable. And then our severity, well, if the wingtip fell off, the plane's still going to fly fine. I guess maybe it hits someone on the ground, but that's really seems like stretching it. And it's not going to affect the plane's flight characteristics all that much. So the risk is also, severity, is negligible. And so between the two of those, we are not worried about this risk. This is a low risk situation we're looking at. Let's see if it catches up with me. It's fine. But then as they come up and they see things like, okay, well, there's a little bit of oil under the brake discs. Is that a problem? Or I'm sorry, a little bit of liquid under the brake discs. Is that a problem? And then you can kind of walk through the same thing and help them understand what risks they're taking on when they do this.
Would that be a 3 strikes and you're out situation?
Could be. I mean, if you start to get a bunch of them in a row, that's where it would be. Even if it's a bunch of, especially medium risks, that's where I start to think like, any one of them maybe I'm okay with depending on the day, but yeah. Okay, last one here is perceive, process, and perform, and then we'll do a couple of questions. So talked about frat. This example comes from a night flight I was going to do with Edward Abraham, which some of you guys probably know, so another CFI in the club. We were going out just to go fly some instrument approaches. There was no particular reason, just a nice night to do it. We noticed in our climb out that our VY pitch was 8 degrees instead of 12 degrees like it normally is in 81034. We hadn't seen anything else before the takeoff. Everything on the pre-flight and takeoff checks and everything was good, but we were seeing that the pitch plus power wasn't equaling performance. So perceiving it is then the first step of this perceive, process, perform model. So in this case, perceive, this one goes through a couple more examples, but PAVE, we have the pilot, aircraft environment, external pressures. In this case, the aircraft had this abnormally shallow angle. It's not caught up with me.
You were hitting VY at a lower angle?
Correct. So we were flying at the VY airspeed, but it wasn't the angle that normally gets us VY. Yeah, and so it wasn't developing as much power as it should have. Yeah, I'll see if it catches up with me here. Sorry, we'll give it a second. So for PAVE, a couple other things from the flight, but the aircraft-wise, we were seeing that it was climbing at an abnormally shallow angle, especially for a calm and chilly night. We were expecting pretty good performance, and it was kind of crummy. Was it terrible? I mean, it wasn't atrocious, but it was concerning. We perceived something seemed wrong. So next thing to do is process. Lesser known acronym is CARE, so you can process with CARE. I'm not going to pretend that we ran through all of CARE while we were now turning crosswind, but this is how you would theoretically apply it. The idea is you think about the consequences. So engine not developing full power is an issue of unknown magnitude, so we don't really know what's wrong with the engine. Possible we have a complete engine failure. Alternatives, maybe if it was like a warm night or high density altitude, it would look the same, but that didn't seem to be the case here. The reality of the situation, we're doing a night flight, and so an engine issue at night is riskier than during the day. Even if we have a partial engine failure, that can be really problematic. And the last thing is external pressures. So we fly this plane all the time. It's my plane. I definitely want to believe it's flying well. It's sort of this feeling of like, what are the odds that like it just so happens to be, it's our first night flight together in forever, just happens to be tonight that it happens. This kind of pressure feeling like, it's probably not what's going on. So the FAA asks, why must I care about these circumstances? And so in this case, we cared because the risk of an engine failure at night is unacceptably high. And last thing on here is perform with team. So team is probably just about as little known as CARE. It's about choosing and implementing risk controls. So at this point, we're flying the downwind leg out of San Carlos. We could transfer the risk, although in this case, since we're already flying, there's no way to transfer it. A good example of transferring the risk is if you're going on a solo cross country and you're supposed to fly somewhere just for fun, maybe after your training, and it seems like the conditions might be out of your limits, grabbing a CFI to come along with you then transfers the risks to the CFI. So it is a way of transferring it. Maybe you grab someone with more experience to come along, something like that. You could eliminate the risk, so get down to the airport as soon as possible, end the flight. We could accept the risk, so perhaps it's worth to go for a night flight. It's another option. Or we could mitigate the risk. So one way to mitigate is, now we were pretty close to the airport, so it didn't really apply, but let's say we were further, maybe we climb to gain altitude while we have a working engine, get ourselves within range of glide to an airport if we needed to. And we could do that for the whole flight, potentially, if we needed. So mitigating is another option. In this case, we were still within glide of the runway, and so we just requested a clearance to land and taxi back to parking, and then grounded the aircraft until it could be inspected by maintenance. I think the whole experience was quite interesting because it had the same earmark that we talk about with perceiving issues, which is it's really easy to go, probably not a problem, or like, this seems fine or whatever. For instance, I had a magneto failure in an IFR flight a little while back, and the engine was kind of coming in and out and revving a little bit. And I remember having this thought of like, And then I went, wait a minute, the engine doesn't do that normally. Like, even if it's not a big deal, something's wrong here. There's something that I need to think about a little bit more to decide if this is a risk or not. So I think when we noticed this angle of climb, it would have been really easy to say, everything else seems to be working fine. But we decided to take it seriously because we couldn't explain it. Two big phrases we talked about. It's better to be on the ground wishing you're in the air than in the air wishing you're on the ground. I'm sure you all have heard this one. And then back to that same one we started with. Superior pilot uses a superior judgment to avoid situations that require the use of a superior skill. So do I think Ed and I could have done an emergency landing at night with an engine failure? I hope so, but I was really glad to not need to find out. One other thing just to top this off, of course, the decision-making was based on the information we had at the time, but it turns out there actually was a hole in the cylinder, and the next thing that happened to the engine is it was completely replaced. So there definitely was a problem that we were seeing. Now, if they had found that there was no issue, that's also fine. I think we made the best decision, but it turns out that there was. By the way, this is them squirting water at the engine. That's not loading it all on here. They're squirting water to show with pressure coming out of it where the hole was in the engine. So there you go. Yeah. Okay, I think that's it. All my blog posts have tons and tons of little after things. That is a presentation for today. Thank you. Any questions? What do you want to talk more about? I'll give one while people are thinking. I wrote this actually in the FRAT blog post, but I actually use the FRAT decision-making model a lot more in my day-to-day life than I thought I would. Not like written out form, but just thinking through what's the severity and likelihood. So I mentioned that I have a baby and I have a dog. I wrote about this in the blog post, but one example with the baby is, we're going for a short walk. Do we bring the diaper bag? Well, the severity of the problem if she poops and we don't know any way to deal with it is maybe, medium or so. I can't remember the exact phrasing for it. But the likelihood of it is low, and so the composite risk is like low, and we probably feel fine about that. A different one is the dog starts pacing in the back of the car on a long road trip. Looks like he needs to poop. Well, the severity of that problem is critical, and the likelihood is probable, and so now we have a serious risk here, and we are definitely going to pull over. So, just a different way to think about it. Yeah, go
Can
on.
I make an input here? So
Yeah.
identifying and classifying the risk is changes from person to person based
Yes.
on the experience. So one of the biggest challenges in aviation, most dangerous thing is the complacency. Besides two CFIs flying together,
Yeah.
and then so complacency is a threat. And then I'm not sure if you mentioned about the normalization of deviation.
No, that's a good one. Yeah.
Deviance, normalization of deviance. So
Yeah.
as you said, you come duck under whatever it is. You come do this once, you survive. Do the second, you survive. You're not going to survive third time. That's normalization of deviance here. So that's why myself, as I get more experience, I get to stick to my checklist more and more, and I try to be more disciplined in the
Yeah, that's a really good point. Normalization of deviance, that would be a really good one to put in this actually, because it falls in that same category. Yeah. Thanks, Ron. That's good. Yeah.
One interesting thing, you said, along the same lines, that this is different for different people.
Yeah.
Okay. It can be different for the same person too. So I learned to fly when I was back in high school,
Mhm.
a long time ago, and I took several decades off, and I'm back into it.
Yeah.
And I look at risk very differently now, much more conservative. And
Yeah.
actually, I looked at my logbooks. I did some spins in light aerobatics back in the day.
Yep.
Entry, I did some spins and some loops and rolls with the CFI. Great. 2 days later, solo, same thing. So I did one flight in like 1.1 hours, did
Yeah.
all this stuff. And really? Did I really go do that on my own?
It seems a little risky.
It was
Yeah.
fine.
Yeah.
And I don't remember it being an issue at all.
Yeah.
And so my logbook's peppered with that back in the 80s.
Yeah.
So I guess as you look at things differently, different stages of life,
Yeah.
it can vary.
Yeah. An understanding too of what can go wrong as you start to see more things that have gone wrong for others. You go, oh, this is
Yeah.
a bigger problem.
Yeah,
you know?
it's like, it's easy. It's opposite rudder. What can
Yeah.
take the stall?
Yeah. Yeah. Totally agree. Yeah.
My impression is with the frat approach that probably the most challenging part is coming up with all the different risks that exist.
Yeah.
How do you talk about that a little bit? What resources do you use to make sure you're thinking of them all when
Yeah.
you know you're done?
Yeah. Good question. So as a starting point, if you want to read more about it, the Risk Management Handbook actually has several case studies, and they break it out like, here's all of the risks. And they do a really good, essentially they have PAVE, and then for each of the hazards identified, they list out the risks. So it's this like multi-tiered sort of frat, and it's like this long for a single scenario. And one of the things that is really helpful, I found, to writing it all out is starting with PAVE and just putting the headings in and then brainstorm the things that are possible. You sort of can go too far, I find. Like, if you include things like there's the crack with the drill stop and the wingtip, that starts to feel like maybe one level too much. But especially with mountain flying, it can be quite a long list by the time you're done. And hopefully it's pretty easy by the time you go through it. But, if you find something, it's important. So, yeah. Does that answer the question?
Yeah, it's probably just take some practice and just
A little bit, yeah.
maybe pulling out the manual too and reading some things to
Yeah.
see have I thought of all of what can go wrong.
Yes, yeah. And actually
Being more familiar with systems would help, I'm sure.
Yep. I also, student solo one was a really good example of this. So the wet runway one, maybe it's in the back of my mind, but it hadn't really occurred to me as something I should be concerned about for the student.
I had the same thought when I saw that. I was
Yeah.
like, would I have thought of that? And
Yeah.
It's obvious once you hear it.
Once you hear it, I go, oh yeah, duh,
Would
yeah.
I have thought of it ahead of time?
Yeah, and so the reason that came up is I was researching the scenario. So I went and said, and actually it was so when I had the conversation with a student, it was like, hey, we're not going to for this reason. But when I was writing the blog post, I went and did some more reading, and someone else mentioned this, and I went, oh. But that was just their experience, and I pulled it just from looking up the scenario. Although totally works for other situations too. Yeah. Good question. Any other ones? Cool. Okay, should we call it there?
Thank you.
Great. All right. Thanks, everyone.
In 2 weeks.
2 days
It's
ago.
only in 2 weeks.
Not last night, maybe the night before.
2 weeks?
Yes.
Yes.
I was in our plane.
Really question. Something. So I took a class on aviation safety last semester. It was good. So we talked a lot about what you taught about today. There's a couple resources that I want to look into that you mentioned. Yeah. One of the things that they taught about though was FEMA, which is failure modes and effective analysis. So essentially, you noted risk is the severity times the likelihood. Replace the likelihood with occurrence. So it's the likelihood of occurrence.
Okay, sure.
And then add the likelihood of detection. How likely are you able to notice it? And I thought that was really cool. It's like, if it's something you're very easily able to notice.
The engine failure one's a good example. Yeah.
Engine failure, you're very easily able to notice that. Indications inside with low RPM, enunciators, and then also seeing a prop stop, hearing it, feeling it,
Yeah.
likelihood.
If you find a
very easy.
resource you can share with me on that, I'd love
Yeah.
it. That's a really good point, because you could have...
The issue with it though is if you're trying to do it beforehand, because it's like anytime we go up, of course there's a risk of engine failure, but is that a risk we can identify? If that's a risk we can identify, then there's like millions of other risks we identify. Like flying into us, so
That's the
like
problem, is if you list everything out, it's not really-
beforehand it doesn't work. But after the fact, then you can kind of apply it. That's kind of what's like. It could work, it could not work.
Yeah,
But
yeah.
essentially, so failure mode and effective analysis. So you take those three numbers and you assign them values.
Yeah.
So severity is at 10.
Yeah,
So
got it.
it's 1 to 10, low severity or high severity.
Yeah.
10.
Yeah.
The likelihood of it occurring is 10.
Okay.
Occurs very often.
Okay.
And the likelihood of detection being 10. It's very hard to notice. Multiply those three numbers and you get a value, which is called a risk priority number. The higher that value is, the more priority and attention you should give to mitigating it, which is kind of interesting.
Interesting.
So
That's
you get
cool.
everything,
You should
you
send
get
that to
all
me if you
the-
find it, because that's like, that is a really big oversight in this route I hadn't really thought about. Yeah, if you can't detect it, then what do you do?
It's a good tool. So the NTS, this came from the NTSB that they use, but essentially when they're coming up with like recommendation actions, they'll use RPN numbers to identify which issues need to be solved first, and then they'll assign that in the NTSB final report. Like, what do we need to do?
Yeah.
Kind of cool. So it's kind of cool. But yeah, I can send you an article on
Yeah,
that.
please do. Please do. I might put a link in the blog.
There's a good one on NASA. They have like a document that I use.
Yeah, thanks. Really great. Yeah, appreciate it. Evo, Jack.
And I've been working on the chief pilot, Ashley, for if possible to do something like this monthly. I think a monthly safety seminar. I learned to fly at the Air Force Aero Club. And they had actually, to be a member of the club, they had a requirement.
You had to
You
attend a certain
attend
amount.
a certain number. Obviously, you can't attend all of them,
Right.
but
That's an
if you were
interesting
considering
idea.
doing this on a regular basis.
Yeah. I would be open to it. I think there's a lot of other people who would be open to it.
And
Yeah.
other people. I mean, obviously, we can't put the burden all on
Yeah. No, I think it's a great idea. I'd love to get another rhythm going, because I think as people start to attend more of them, the whole culture around the club gets a little bit more thoughtful.
Right, exactly.
Yeah, very cool.
And is there a way to get your, it was 5 minutes late.
Oh, that's fine,
To get
yeah.
your presentation,
I can share with you if you want. Yeah. It's all on, essentially everything's links out to other things.
oh, okay.
Same question, so
yeah.
very quick. On here,
Yeah.
do we get to the same blue presentation you had?
This one is just, I have a copy here, but I can send you a link to it if you want. It's really, there's really not that much on it, but I'm happy to share it.
Yeah. Anything you can do.